I think we should begin at the beginning. Annie, you were born in 1976, and when you were 4, born in Iran, and when you were 4, Iraq declared war on Iran. For the next 8 years, your experience of Iran was as a war-ravaged place. Can you describe what it was like growing up in that environment, how it affected you?
I mean, at the beginning, it was the revolution, and then there was the 8 Years' War. And I think people always ask me, like, if it was scary, or if it was, like, how did that affect me when I was a child? But like, for me, just kind of growing up into it, I feel like it was just like a normal thing where you would get up and the air raids, you would hear the alarm and you would run down to the basement, and then you would hear the sounds of explosion and the vibration and air raids. My mom tells me, she's not here yet,
Still talk about that.
That at the time, to deal with this, I would make drawings, trying to make sense out of the sound that I was hearing, the vibrations, and this sort of synesthesia continued with me to this day, and it's a huge part of my work.
That's really interesting, because what you experienced as a child, the war was unseen, that it was all aural, it was in your head. And as you say, that sort of changed or exacerbated how your brain works, because what you have, which only a few other artists have, is that with synesthesia, of course, that ability when you when you see colour or paint, you hear a sound, that the senses are combined. So with those early drawings, how did that manifest itself? Can you remember? How did the sounds become drawings?
My mom says they're mostly like monsters. So.
You don't have these drawings yet, we can't?
Unfortunately not. I wish I did.
And so at an early date you were drawing your experiences of war. The reason I wanted to start with this is because a lot of Ali's work, as you look at it, underlying it has a sense of war or violence or battles, not of the war that you experienced, but of general chaos on the battlefield. So when we talk about the work in more detail, we can come back to that. But you moved at age 12. I hope that wasn't me. You moved at age 12, first to Turkey and then to California. And how did that affect you as a child? Do you remember the difference between the cultures?
Oh, yeah, I do. I mean, my idea of America was New York, and then I ended up in San Diego, from all places. So it was a culture shock for me, but at the same time, I think because of the language barrier, again, art was something that I was able to sort of still use to express this change that I was going through. So that still was sort of parallel with me at that time, to be able to sort of deal with this change.
Yeah, but interestingly, you didn't go to art college first.
I didn't, no. I actually ended up doing graffiti art in San Francisco in mid-90s all the way to late 90s, and at the same time I was making artwork in my studio, in my home, and I was sort of trying to do the work that I'm doing now, and then I sort of reached a point where I realized it was time to sort of take it to another level, and decided to go to art school in 2000. I was studying psychology and trying to make the work on my own. And in 2000 I moved to New York and went to art school.
So you moved from west to east, having moved from east to west before.
Yes. Got a little bit closer.
Yeah, a bit peripatetic in your journeyings around. Why? I mean, you particularly said you chose to not paint your own work initially when you went to art school. You actually wanted to learn how to paint, rather than, I guess, tagging or beautiful graffiti art, but you wanted to get back to the kind of armature of painting and drawing.
Yeah, that's because I had reached a point on my own, trying to make the work that I make, and I realized that I needed more tools to be able to sort of take it to the next level. And then when I was in school, all the way to my my second year of graduate school, all I did was just do the homework, basically, and just trying to understand and learn how it works, because I always knew that I wanted to work from my imagination, so I felt like I need to know how to do things in order to sort of bring them out.
And were you stocking up your imagination? I mean, were you going to lots of galleries?
I was, yeah.
And which is your favourite? Can you remember? I think the Met
Like
is quite close to your heart.
yeah, the Met, yeah. That's like my second home.
Yeah, I ask this because when you look at the work of Ali's, it's very suggestive, it's very rich in detail that you might think, oh, is that a Veronese? Is that from... And so when you look at the work, it speaks a lot to you about Western and non-Western art history.
Sure.
So I wondered if you kind of filled that memory bank, because when you paint, you don't paint with images around you, do you?
No.
As you say, you work from your mind and your memory.
From the memory, yeah. I mean, when I'm not painting, I'm going and seeing shows and looking at tons of images and researching and stuff. But when I'm painting, there's no references, there's no drawings. It's just purely working on the canvas, and it's very abstract, and then everything comes after the fact. Like all the figures and the narrative sort of comes after, and then everything that I'm reading, because when I read literature, there's also this parallel synesthesia world of imagery that's going and going. It's a good book, and
like a film running in your head.
Right. And then these sort of images somehow, not directly but indirectly, could work their way into the painting, mixed with other things.
So the way you paint is almost not automatic, but it's from all the images that are in your head from books read, film seen, art seen, and they somehow manifest on the canvas.
Yes.
I think you said before that after your BFA, your Bachelor in Fine Arts in America, you went on to do a Master's, and at some point in that, you were offered a travel grant to come to Europe, to go to France, and this is really significant for your work, bringing lots of these threads about how you work together. Can you say something about that?
The D-Day site?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So, I went to the D-Day site, and suddenly, as I was looking around, I felt as though I had, there was like a sort of a flashback, as if I had seen these images before. And then I started to realize that I had seen these in Iran, and that's what was coming back, and that's when I started to think that
the images of war?
Yes. And that's when I decided that I'm going to go back to this idea of using sound again and synesthesia, and I started to make charcoal. That's my mom.
Hi, Mom. What an entrance.
That's when I started to go back to this idea of synesthesia, and this was my second year for my master's, and we had to do a thesis. So then I had sort of learned a lot that I wanted to sort of work with and do my own work finally, and I went back to doing these charcoal drawings based on the sounds of explosion, and then from there I took it towards the paintings.
So with the synesthesia, that obviously it was reawakened in an artistic sense from that early boyhood experience of drawing monsters for the sounds to D-Day and the violence of battle there. Again, a battle that you didn't see, but you experienced through the memories of others, I presume, or being there at the sites. It's a very rich kind of place. In between that time, how did synesthesia affect you? Did it affect you when you were growing up?
It did, and that's why I tried to study psychology, because I was trying to understand what this thing is. Like say if I would listen to music, there would be this parallel world, or if I would read something, there would be this parallel world. If I would see a good film, it was always like I would get really excited about these things that were going on in my imagination, and I always thought, how could I possibly get these out somehow?
So one world would create another world, would create another world. So a literary world would create a cinematic world, or
exactly. Yeah.
So you graduated in 2007, and 8 years on, we are here with every, world collections owning your material, Charles Saatchi, François Pinault. I mean, it's a fairly rapid rise. Do you attest that to your work striking a chord now, or is it because you did all this thinking kind of along the way, studying psychology, that feeds in, the synesthesia feeds in, the masters, and did you feel like when you came out of college you were fully formed as an artist?
I think I was ready, because before I went to school, I sort of did my rebellious year against academia and all that stuff, and I think when I was in school, I was really hungry for it, and I wanted to learn everything I wanted to learn. And when I came out, I was really ready. To do what I wanted to do, because I had put a hold on it for so long.
And so now you work in New York,
Yes.
and you have a studio there. I think for the benefit of all of us, and just because I'm quite nosy, it'd be quite good to understand how you work, because I know looking
Right.
and slowing time down is quite significant in how you work.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's a matter of going to the studio and getting connected with the work, and then that's when everything happens. And what I mean by that is, like, there's days that I go to the studio and nothing happens. I just sit there and stare at the canvas for 8 hours and then pack my bag and go home. But then there are times that I go in and sort of slowly begin, and things start to come about. You put something down, and then there's a reaction to that, and so on and so on, and then it just sort of starts to speed up. And next thing you know, it's like 10 at night, and I have no idea what happened. Like, time just sort of flies by, and I realize, okay, it's time to go home, sleep, eat. But I think that's, like, for me, that's like the most magical moment, because things happen that tells me where to go next, that I couldn't have predicted. Things come about that, obviously the thought was there, and the concept was there of what I wanted to do, but I just didn't know how to go about it, and somehow I was subconsciously, that there was a way for me to find a way to create it without forcing anything.
And when you paint, you've talked before about how the synesthesia almost channels the painting in a way that when you paint, you hear a note with each brushstroke, in a way that, if I understand it right, that when you put a mark on the canvas, you realise you want to keep making the same note in your head, so you'll repeat the mark until...
No, I don't repeat the mark. It's more like, as soon as I put the brush down, the sound begins, and then I sort of know which direction to go, when to stop, and then what comes after that, and then so on and so on and so on. And that's how I'm able to create the composition. Like, without that sound, I wouldn't know which way to go, because it's such an abstract thing that I'm beginning with, that there's no direction. There's no photograph that says, oh, I'm trying to make this, or a drawing or anything like that. Like, I have no idea where it's going.
So you're guided by the sound,
yeah,
in a way, and all these other things that you've experienced, whether it's a good book or a film,
right,
or what have you. I mean, I think this is a good time to return to what, although, as you say, you're guided by the sounds, which is almost an automatic reaction, that somehow you're out of, it's like an out-of-body experience, or an out-of-control, you're being told or directed emotionally how to paint. But underlying all your work is an immense energy, which comes from these brush marks, but also comes from, I would suggest, and I think you have said, comes from those early experiences of war, and from a sense of the epicness of battle. It is the fundamental life and death moment, heaven and hell. It all comes down to that kind of apocalyptic, whether a real battle or a battle on a canvas or what have you. So this underpins, this is probably a really good example, it underpins many of your work, that you get a sense of sort of looking down on a battle.
yeah.
And the energy in the paint is like, unlike maybe battles that we know, say Uccello's Battle of San Romano, which is incredibly staged.
Yeah.
With this, it's all energy. It's like the energy of the battle somehow has created this maelstrom of force on the canvas.
Sure, and you know, it's also like it's the apocalypse of the mind as well. It's sort of, is it I mean, I like this sort of ambivalence between, well, everything in my painting. I like to have ambivalence. So, is it an apocalypse that takes place somewhere, or is it apocalypse of the mind in my own head with my own thoughts? And maybe all these are a conflict of me trying to figure something out. These different opposite ideas that I can't quite lean towards one or the other.
So is it almost like the tension that, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Sistine Chapel where there's God and Adam's fingers are like this. It's that moment, because they're not touching, it's that tension in the middle.
Yeah.
It's with your work particularly, and when you see it in reproduction, it is slightly different, I think, when you see the real thing. It looks more abstract, perhaps, in reproduction. When you see the paintings, the figures pop out more easily. But there is that tension between figuration and abstraction, the biggest tension you can have in painting, in a way.
Right. I mean, it's all about this micro way of looking at it. So if you look at it from the far, it could be abstract. If you get midway, it becomes really detailed, and then when you get close, it becomes abstract again.
And in the work in the new show, it's interesting that before I looked in this book, I didn't know your early work, but you can really see this progression in a way from very tentative abstract marks to in the work in the new show, which will come up shortly. You get a sense of the figure having more weight. I mean, can you describe how that has come about?
Yeah, I feel like when I look at the earlier works, even the figures were like smaller and more fragmented, and I feel like as time went by, they sort of became more mature and more confident of themselves, of who they are, and they got stretched out and bigger. I mean, in that triptych in the show, I mean, I've done the largest figures I've ever done, and they're sort of just, you know, they're kind of pretty confident.
And it's interesting with the triptych. I don't know if someone can get the triptych up on there. Thank you.
A detail.
Yeah, a detail, all the triptych. It's called At Once, and it is a huge work that you will get a sense of scale actually, because there's a person next to it. And you can see it's a kind of procession across the foreground, but there's still the purple clouds taking your eye into it. But then at the surface, which you can't see in this image, is scored down with vertical, what looks like rain, but very neatly scored all the way down, as if to stop you looking into it, to stop you going beyond the figures into the landscape, which again could be seen as a battleground. It brings you right back to the surface. And I think the way you paint is interesting in that way. Another kind of oscillation between looking at historic figurative painters, the Venetian painters, or Veronese, or Michelangelo, or Titian. We're looking at painters who had a lot of depth in their work, and almost that you are referencing that, but you are stopping us going in, that it's about the surface, and about possibly this comes from your graffiti past, or from the calligraphy of Iran where you grew up. I mean, what interests you about another tension in your work between depth and surface?
I think I just like that ambivalence of having things. I mean, that's why the title of the show is At Once, because I like the simultaneous. Actually, my wife, who's here, came up with that title.
Very good.
She wants the credit. The ambivalence between having a flat surface and having depth, because at the end it's a painting. It's paint, and you're looking at the paint. That's why. But the lines also, for me, there in this painting, I like the idea of having the painting be between, if it's a theater and these people are wearing costumes and sort of performing, wearing masks, or are they really what they are? And the lines could also be like as if they're like puppets, and these are sort of, it's like a show, it's like a game or not.
that way of working, where you are working between figuration and abstraction, you're not making it literal for someone looking at it. I mean, particularly when you go and stand in front of the real painting, little figures pop out at you, and then if you take your eye away, they disappear again. That there's a lot of suggestion in the work. I mean, again, the time thing I think is really important. You can see this is cinematic in scope, but it's sort of everything a film is not, because as the beautiful title suggests at once, you see it all at once, but you have to give it hours to see it fully, or perhaps you can never see it fully. I mean, I think there's this incredible power that painting has in this way, that a painting can be instantly seen in totality, but grows and changes as you look at it. I mean, time is very important to you as you paint, isn't it?
I mean, it's like you could go look at a Rembrandt portrait, and it's just a portrait, but it's not. It's like it holds all this time within it, and like you said, you could go back and look at it over and over again, and it still holds that time, and it lives through time. And for me, it's important to be able to create work that you don't see it instantly. You know, you look at it online, and it's not like you look at it online and you get it and you just go to the next. It takes time, even for me. I mean, the work I've made, and they've sat in my studio for months and months. Like it takes time for it to unveil itself because of the nature of the way I painted it.
But also, there's a sense that in the way you paint it, you want to somehow go beyond one reading of it in time.
Right.
That this is not a battle that we need to pinpoint. This
Right.
is not
It's not a
Normandy,
particular
it's not
time.
Iran.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's not a particular time or place. It's encyclopedic. It's like worlds within worlds within worlds.
That's interesting. I want to read you something from. You don't know me to do this, but anyway, see if. Hang on, let me find it. It's actually from a story you really like, I think. It's by Borges, and it says the character in it, who is Borges, the writer, experiences the world in totalis. So he sees a tiny sphere, and by looking at the sphere, he can see the entire world all at once. He says, I saw millions of delightful and horrible acts. None amazed me so much as the fact that all occupied the same point, without superposition and without transparency. What my eyes saw was simultaneous. What I shall write is successive. So this is a story called The Aleph, and it's almost, to me, it's like he's describing your work.
Actually titled one of my works Aleph because of that. I mean, it's a point in space that everything sort of goes there.
And
in
also,
one room.
yeah, and in your work, that what you seem to want to show us is everything.
The one before that was Aleph.
Yeah. That's
very
handy.
Aleph, yeah.
So I think you'll see that you can read these shapes as figures, or you can read them, that the subjectivity of the person looking is as significant as what you want to convey.
Your vision completes the rest.
Yeah, in this work.
Yeah.
In all the work.
Right.
Yeah. I think time is something that is very interesting in works like this and in all your work. But also movement, that sense of movement you get with paint. I don't know if you all agree, but it's very hard to convey movement in a painting without being literal. So if you think of someone, I don't know, Judith cutting off the head of Holofernes, it's still a staged theatrical frozen moment that's being recorded. Whereas what you try to convey, I think, is movement through the paint strokes. And so in here you can see it's like a maelstrom of movement. I mean, is this perhaps because you work almost as time stops and you want to get closer to you kind of work automatically that you're being...
Well, I think I try to sort of match it as closely as possible to the way I see it, as in my imagination, or like the way you dream, and things are not tangible. Like in your memory, you could remember someone, but that keeps changing over time in your mind of who that person. I mean, if you haven't seen the person. So I'm really fascinated by that idea of things being in constant, they're constantly changing in the painting. Like, how could I do that? How could I convey that? You know, it is hard, but that's why the motion effect comes through, because they're not tangible and they're sort of maybe transforming into some other element. You know, you can't really fully grasp them, and I make sure that I don't overdevelop the figure in there, because I don't want a central figure. I don't want a hero. I want the whole canvas to be important.
And certainly in some of the works in the current show that's true, but actually in others there is a more confidence in the figures themselves, that we can glimpse whole bodies, particularly in at once in the big triptych you just saw, that we can get a sense of their tangibility even though they disappear. And there is that sense of, but when they appear, they are part animal, part human, part machine. I mean, you're quite interested in making hybrid creatures in a way.
Sure. I mean, and that's the way naturally they end up coming out. Part machine, part human, part gods, part animals. And I feel like, and they're always within themselves. There's a struggle as well, not with each other, but just within themselves. They're trying to figure themselves out.
As if they might transform at any time.
Or just disappear.
I mean, there's because you're dealing with very big themes, life and death, battles, apocalypse, there is a spirituality in your work that I think people pick up on, and I know that underpins quite a lot of the work, that sense of the earth that you would, I mean, Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights is a work that's important to you, but that sense of transcendence, of without being adhering to any particular religion, I think.
Sure.
That sense of the base earth, or the place we live, and the place we aspire to. I mean, I think that's fair reading of the work?
Sure, yeah.
That there is this sense of, are you aiming with the marks to transcend, to try and get your hand on something that, like faith, that is very difficult to pinpoint?
Yeah, that's what I meant by stepping into the unknown. You know, sort of leaving everything and going to this unknown place where maybe there's some kind of understanding.
A kind of touching immanence through,
right.
As you're trying to get the chaos into order.
But then it's very temporary too.
Yes.
Because then you have to come back to this world.
And is that why in the work itself you think you grasp something,
right,
just when you have a brainwave and it slips through your fingers if you look away, if you start focusing on it?
But then, yeah, and then you could be wrong.
I wanted to just keep an eye on time, but I wanted to ask you about music when you finish the work, because this I think, I don't know about you, but for me, that the sense of what a synesthete can hear is something I cannot hear. So it's hard to pin down for someone who doesn't experience sounds when they paint. But I wondered if when you finish, if the paintings retain a sense of sound, or if they suggest certain soundtracks, or do they have a flavour that is beyond the visual?
Not certain soundtracks, but I could hear all the sounds that I heard when I made them, but now they're all together. And I could also, when I go and see, you know, if I go to the Met or see shows, paintings, they also have a sound for me if I like the work.
So a painting by any artist doesn't need to be yourself?
Yeah. If it speaks to me, there's a sound, some sort of sound there. Yeah.
Is it possible to articulate the sound as they work up here? I mean, can we? Is it like a symphony?
We need a band.
Yeah, we could sing in there. That's a bad idea. I think one last thing I'd like to talk about before we open up to questions is colour. I mean, perhaps I should have started with this. It's so fundamentally important, obviously, to the way you work and to the work itself. How does the colour, the selection, because you as far as I understand it, you don't start out with sketches. You go the surface of this book is the actual canvas you work on. It's a linen canvas. So you start with a canvas, a blank canvas, literally with nothing, no idea of what's going on it. How do you make that first mark? Is it colour? Is it a sound that appears?
usually it's just staring at the white canvas for a long time, like for maybe a week. And then, yeah, and then just something comes to mind, you know, and I just go with it. Before I used to dwell on it, like, oh, but it could, because it's infinite possibilities, you could go a million different ways, but now I've learned I just, you know, first thing that pops in, if I feel it's the right one, then I just go with that, and then after that it just ends up being a reaction to that mark. And you know, a lot of these paintings, underneath them there could be like 10 other paintings that I've made that didn't work. So then the colors maybe were completely different.
And this building over time, I mean, again, it goes back to what we were saying about time locked into the canvas, that it allows them to live on because the time is kind of locked in there, like a palimpsest or something. But with the colours, do you feel that they reflect your moods in any way? That you're trying to use the colour emotionally to connect with something inside the viewer?
No, I don't think. I don't know. I think it's more of what the painting is asking from me to do. Like if I have something there that's a certain color, then it requires for this color to sort of balance it out, and so on and so on, and it kind of goes like that. But in the last painting in this show, something completely different happened. I don't know if
Can we get that one?
It's the more monochrome one. Which actually, it sort of got inspired from this one. Yeah, it got inspired from the drawings that I made in the show, and also I was having a conversation with someone in my studio, and we were talking about what would it be, because she was saying that you know, your work are all inner worlds, and they don't point to a geography, a place. And I thought, what would it be like if I did make a painting that it had a filter of where I live, you know, like in Brooklyn. If I use this palette that I observe around my studio, outside of my studio, in the streets, and use that, what would that be like? And this is what Brooklyn looks like. So this was a conscious decision that I made to make this painting.
So a bit like Cy Twombly when he went to Italy and the colour leapt into his Rome works. That actually the observing the colours in your locale influenced the feel of this painting.
Right.
I mean, I think it's interesting you say that the work isn't geographically specific, and I agree. But actually, perhaps this is one reason why your work is so collected. Is because everyone looking at that work can see in it what they want to see in it, can feel a sense of this may be from, you know, this little line reminds me of a Persian miniature, or here perhaps is the sort of chaos of the Last Judgment of Michelangelo, or here's a kooky character who looks like he's from Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. That actually that sense of suggestion you make allows all of us as subjective individuals to read into your work what we like. Lots of food for thought. I think I've seen her all proud about, so maybe we should move on to questions. Do you have a microphone for? Yes, that's brilliant. I think, can I see if anyone has a question to start with? Because I'm quite happy just to stay up here chatting all night.
I just wanted to find out, again, it's probably quite a nosy question, more about your graffiti days. Don't want to get you in trouble.
I'm sure it was all legal.
Yeah. I was just wondering how, where you did it and what inspired you to do graffiti, and were you part of a group or did you do it by yourself, and how you find that feeds into your work, because obviously it almost seems like you work very quickly here, but you work in detail, and it kind of feels like you might be doing the same movements that you did when you were doing that.
I think when I moved to San Francisco in mid-90s, it was the golden age of graffiti art there. So everybody from Europe, from East Coast, from Los Angeles were moving there, and I was hanging out with a group of friends who not only did graffiti, but we also like had conversations, and we actually had gotten a legal wall from the mayor of San Francisco where we had the rights to, and everybody from Europe and East Coast would come and do collaborations with us. So it was actually a very good art education for me in a different way. And no, I was fascinated by graffiti. I mean, I still am, and definitely it's had influence on my work now.
Anybody else? Somebody at the back.
What's very interesting in detail is multi-layered. How do you know when to stop? How do you know when a piece is finished and one stroke too many?
I think there comes a time that it sort of quiets down. The painting, it doesn't ask me for more. And usually when I say it's finished, I usually just put it to the side in my studio and sort of have it be there for another 5-6 months, and I come in every day and sort of take a look, and if nothing jumps out at me for that 5-6 months, and then I know it's finished, you know. And there's never been a time that after it's left, I said, oh, I wish I could have done this or that, because it's, you know, the chapter ended and it was over, finished.
There's something about scale in your work which we didn't touch on, because I noticed when I looked through these slides a similar thing, that some works are actually quite small, and yet we're looking at them the same size as the big 7-meter canvas. And I think that gives a slightly misrepresents the marks on your work. But you've said before, I believe, that you like that change in scale.
I do, especially when I've worked on a really large painting. I like to kind of start with a smaller work. Not saying that the small work is like a sketch for the next work or anything like that. They're always like on their own, but I like to work on a small work and then maybe go to another large work and then go back to a small work. But then even in the small work, like the scale shrinks down. It's not like the figure becomes as large as this canvas. I like to sort of push things back and have that bird's eye view no matter what.
Yes, and that's quite important. And again, if you, certainly in British history, a lot of the paintings of battlefields are from that aerial perspective, that imperial perspective, that you own everything you look at. It was quite an imperial ownership way of looking at the work, and you kind of carried on that history. You rather like that view. Is there a different reason for taking that approach? Or?
I think you see it also in Persian miniature, and you also see it in like Bosch and Broidwell, who I like. But I think ultimately it puts the viewer as a judge. Like you become the judge of this scene that you're looking at. And I also like the Rashomon effect of it, where there's all these different sort of figures speaking to you, and you have to make the decision of who's telling the truth to you.
And that's quite interesting. It's almost like this thing. It's almost like you're looking. Yes, you're having to be the judge on it, but you're an outsider looking in, like Borges, looking at everything in totality.
Right.
Sorry, I will stop talking.
On first impression, looking at your paintings, all I could see was sounds that were on the canvas. And I'm just wondering, when you're painting, do you feel like almost composing, that you're building up to some sort of symphony, or that you're actually building a musical score, and then you just know when the sounds have got to the point where you're happy with the composition, and it feels very musical, but are the sounds more important than the figures? Which is the thing that you really want to balance more than anything else?
I think they go hand in hand, you know, because if I'm not making the figures, I'm not hearing the sounds. So as I'm making it, the sound is coming about. I don't hear it beforehand. I hear it when I'm making it. At the beginning, obviously, the sound is much louder because I'm working on the whole canvas, and it's more abstract. But then there's times that I'm sort of like in a miniature mode, and I'm working maybe just on one figure, and then maybe the sounds become more like whispers. So there's like all these different layers of sounds that kind of go through.
And you know when you're finished, when it's all quiet?
When it quiets down.
Is there something also in the marks, when you look at the marks, that I mean, the canvases are incredibly layered, so you may have thinly applied paint and then brush strokes of paint and then scratches on the surface of that, and then these dots or marks that pattern on the top. Sometimes they look like notes on a stave. I mean, they literally have a kind of physical, as you said, that they look like music. I mean, is that, again, is it a subconscious?
It is a subconscious, yeah.
Oh, loads of questions now. This gentleman here.
Do you do much charcoal work?
I do actually. In the current show, I did 15 charcoal drawings, and they're drawings that I made of the figures after I made the paintings to sort of capture a figure on isolated on one surface. Yeah. Not before, but yeah, there are 15 charcoal drawings in the show actually.
No, I saw them, and this is why I was asking. So first,
So that was a trick question.
No, it is. So you done the painting, and from the paintings, then you picked up the characters in small version. Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And did you make them in such a way that they would be as a collection together?
I think so. Now that they're up the way they are, I think they work as a collection. Yeah.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Yes, lady.
It was just a quick question. Seeing as you hear all the sounds in your mind while you're painting, do you ever actually put music on? Any other type of music in your studio when you paint, or do you only hear the sounds in your head?
Going back to what we were talking about, like going to that sort of zone where time disappears, it doesn't matter like what's happening around me, like I won't hear it, you know, and the music won't affect it because it's the sound that I'm hearing when I'm painting. It's a completely different one than the one that I'm playing with my stereo. But when I do listen to music, there is a sort of like a visual parallel world that happens as well that, you know, it's fascinating to me that I could use in the work later.
But actually, when you're painting, it's like an Eastern concept of flow. That the connection between you and the painting is absolute. There's a bomb could go off next to you. You wouldn't. You know, let's hope that would never happen. But you know what I mean? That everything you shut off from the rest of the world.
Yes.
Ali, one of the things, obviously there's the synesthesia with the two senses. Well, one thing you mentioned, not to bring up the accident, but that you can paint with both hands. Can you talk about that a little bit? Or
There's someone with insider knowledge.
only found out the other day, but
Yeah.
I think it's good.
Well, no, I mean, for my last show in New York, I was working on this large triptych, and I injured my hand. I cut my right hand here.
The scar you can see there.
And it was really bad, and I had to finish this triptych. So I had to paint with my left hand, and it actually I ended up doing things I wouldn't have done with my right hand, so it was quite interesting. And I was, you know, kind of using my right hand for the miniature parts with a cast on. But I made most of the painting with my left hand, actually.
How did your gallery feel about that? Did they notice? Did they think it was? I mean, it's interesting. That's a really big change for an artist.
It was funny because it was last year we had a really bad storm in New York, and I had gone, and it was like on December 30th, so December 31st I had come home, from the surgery. I was at the ER for like 8 hours, and then I had to go see a hand specialist the next day. And it was snowing, and I was like on antibiotic, and I went and I didn't want to deal with it, so I came back home and I said, I'm just not going to go. And then my gallery called and they were yelling at me. They sent a car and sent me to some specialist somewhere, so finally.
That right hand is important. They didn't know about the left hand by then. Now they wouldn't bother so much. They knew you've got another hand.
Yeah.
Has anyone got one final question before we have to wrap up?
And my mom has a question.
Yeah, you can have another turn.
Is there a special color that you concentrate on?
One color? No, I think it varies with each painting, you know. I mean, I could start with one particular color to begin with, and then it could stay or it could change. I never know, you know. I think this painting here ended up being a very bluish painting, but maybe I didn't start with that. I can't remember. I like black paint.
And there's greens and purples.
Yeah.
There's a fantastic one in the current show, which the sky looks like it's full of purple rain just falling down. I mean, it's really stunning. I think we need to finish, sadly. One thing to say, if you do want to have a look at the book, it's here. You can buy copies of the book. But it's been a real honour for me to meet Ali and to talk to him today. It felt very brief. There's lots more we could talk about, but perhaps that will entice him back to London for another show in the near future. But please join me in thanking Ali.